to a Buddhist temple deep in the mountains somewhere in southern China. Oh, I didn't go to become a monk. Too lazy for that. I just wanted to find a truly peaceful place to live for a while. The abbot there was my father's old friend. Very intellectual, but became a monk in his old age. The way my father told it, at his level, this was about the only way out. The abbot asked me to stay. I told him, I want to find a peaceful, easy way to just muddle through the rest of my life. The abbot said, this place isn't really peaceful. There are lots of tourists, and many pilgrims too. The truly peaceful can find peace in a bustling city. And to attain that state, you need to empty yourself. I said, I'm empty enough. Fame and fortune are nothing to me. Many of the monks in this temple are worldlier. 160. Chapter 16. The Three-Body Problem. Then me. The abbot shook his head and said, no, emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness is a type of existence. You must use this existential emptiness to fill yourself. His words were very enlightening to me. Later, after I thought about it a bit, I realized that it wasn't Buddhist philosophy at all, but was more akin to some modern physics theories. The abbot also told me he wasn't going to discuss Buddhism with me. His reason was the same as my high school teachers: with my sort, he'd just be wasting his time. That first night, I couldn't sleep in the tiny room in the temple. I didn't realize that this refuge from the world would be so uncomfortable. My blanket and sheet both became damp in the mountain fog, and the bed was so hard. In order to make myself sleep, I tried to follow the abbot's advice and fill myself with emptiness. In my mind, the first emptiness I created was the infinity of space. There was nothing in it, not even light. But soon I knew that this empty universe could not make me feel peace. Instead, it filled me with a nameless anxiety, like a drowning man wanting to grab onto anything at hand. So I created a sphere in this infinite space for myself, not too big, though possessing mass. My mental state didn't improve, however. The sphere floated in the middle of emptiness. In infinite space, anywhere could be the middle. The universe had nothing that could act on it, and it could act on nothing. It hung there, never moving, never changing, like a perfect interpretation for death that I created a second sphere whose mass was equal to the first one's. Both had perfectly reflective surfaces. They reflected each other's images, displaying the only existence in the universe other than itself. But the situation didn't improve much. If the spheres had no initial movement, that is, if I didn't push them at first, they would be quickly pulled together by their own gravitational attraction. Then the two spheres would stay together and hang there without moving, a symbol for death. If they did have initial movement and didn't collide, then they would revolve around each other under the influence of gravity. No matter what the initial conditions, the revolutions would eventually stabilize and become unchanging, the dance of death. I then introduced a third sphere, and to my astonishment, the situation changed completely. Like I said, any geometric figure turns into numbers in the depths of my mind. The sphereless, one-sphere, and two-sphere universes all showed up as a single equation or a few equations, like a few lonesome leaves in late fall. But this third sphere gave emptiness life. The three spheres, given initial movements, went through complex, seemingly never-repeating movements. The descriptive equations rained down in a thunderstorm without end. Just like that, I fell asleep. The three spheres continued to dance in my dream, a patternless, never-repeating dance. Yet, in the depths of my mind, the dance did possess a rhythm. It was just that its period of repetition was infinitely long. This mesmerized me. I wanted to describe the whole period, or at least a part of it. The next day I kept on thinking about the three spheres dancing in emptiness. My attention had never been so completely engaged. It got to the point where one of the monks asked the abbot whether I was having mental health issues. The abbot laughed and said, "Don't worry. He has found emptiness." Yes, I had found emptiness. Now I could be at peace in a bustling city. Even in the midst of a noisy crowd, my heart would be completely tranquil. For the first time, I enjoyed math. I felt like a libertine who has always fluttered carelessly from one woman to another, suddenly finding himself in love. The physics principles behind the three-body problem are very simple. It's mainly a math problem. Didn't you know about Henri Poincaré? Wang Miao interrupted Wei to ask. At the time, I didn't. Yes, I know that someone studying math should know about a master like Poincaré, but I didn't worship masters and I didn't want to become one, so I didn't know his work. But even if I had, I would have continued to pursue the three-body problem. Everyone seems to believe that Poincaré proved that the three-body problem couldn't be solved, but I think they're mistaken. He only proved sensitive dependence on initial conditions, and that the three-body system couldn't be solved by integrals. But sensitivity is not the same as being completely indeterminable. It's just that the solution contains a greater number of different forms. What's needed is a new algorithm. Back then, I thought of one thing. Have you heard of the Monte Carlo method? It's a computer algorithm often used for calculating the area of irregular shapes. Specifically, the software puts the figure of interest in a figure of known area, such. How three bodies would move under the influence of their mutual gravitational attractions is a traditional problem in classical mechanics that arises naturally in the study of celestial mechanics. Many have worked on it since the 16th century. Euler, Lagrange, and more recent researchers have all found solutions for special cases of the three-body problem. Carl F. Sundman later proved the existence of a general solution to the three-body problem in the form of a convergent infinite series, but the series converges so slowly that it is practically useless. Is not equal to Poincaré showed that the three-body problem exhibited sensitive dependence on initial conditions, which we would now understand as characteristic of chaotic behavior. 162. Chapter 16. The three-body problem. As a circle, and randomly strikes it with many tiny balls, never targeting the same spot twice. After a large number of balls, the proportion of balls that fall within the irregular shape compared to the total number of balls used to hit the circle will yield the area of the shape. Of course, the smaller the balls used, the more accurate the result. Although the method is simple, it shows how, mathematically, random brute force can overcome precise logic. It's a numerical approach that uses quantity to derive quality. This is my strategy for solving the three-body problem. I study the system moment by moment. At each moment, the sphere's motion vectors can combine in infinite ways. I treat each combination like a life form. The key is to set up some rules, which combinations of motion vectors are healthy and beneficial, and which combinations are detrimental and harmful. The former receive a survival advantage while the latter are disfavored. The computation proceeds by eliminating the disadvantaged and preserving the advantaged. The final combination that survives is the correct prediction for the system's next configuration, the next moment in time. It's an evolutionary algorithm, Wang said. It's a good thing I invited you along. Shirchang nodded at Wang. Yes. Only much later did I learn that term. The distinguishing feature of this algorithm is that it requires ultra-large amounts of computing power. For the three-body problem, the computers we have now aren't enough. Back then, in the temple, I didn't even have a calculator. I had to go to the accounting office to get a blank ledger and a pencil. I began to build the math model on paper. This required a lot of work, and in no time at all I went through more than a dozen ledgers. The monks in charge of accounts were angry with me, but because the abbot wished it, they found me more paper and pen. I hid the completed calculations under my pillow, and threw the scratch paper into the incense burner in the yard. One evening, a young woman suddenly dashed into my room. This was the first time a woman had shown up at my place. She clutched a few pieces of paper with burnt edges, the scratch paper I had thrown out. They tell me these are yours. Are you studying the three-body problem? Behind her wide glasses, her eyes seemed to be on fire. The woman surprised me. The math I used was unconventional, and my derivations took large leaps. But the fact that she could tell the subject of my study from a few pieces of scratch paper showed that she had unusual math talent and that She, like me, was very devoted to the three-body problem. I didn't have a good impression of the tourists and pilgrims. The tourists had no idea what they were looking at, only running around to snap pictures. As for the pilgrims, they looked much poorer than the tourists, and all seemed to be in a state of numbness, their intellect inhibited. But this woman was different. She looked like an academic. Later I found out that she had come with a group of Japanese tourists. Without waiting for my answer, she added, "Your approach is brilliant. We've been searching for a method like this that could turn the difficulty of the three-body problem into a matter of massive computation. Of course, it would require a very powerful computer." I told her the truth. Even if we were to use all the computers in the world, it wouldn't be enough. But you must have an adequate research environment, and there's nothing like that here. I can give you the use of a supercomputer. I can also give you a mini-computer. Let's leave together tomorrow morning. The woman, of course, was Xin Yufei. Like now, she was concise and authoritarian, but she was more attractive then. I'm naturally a cold person. I had less interest in women than the monks around me. This woman who didn't adhere to conventional ideas about femininity was different, though. She attracted me. Since I had nothing to do anyway, I agreed right away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I draped a shirt over my shoulders and walked out into the yard. In the distance, I saw Xin in the dim temple hall. She knelt before the Buddha with lit joss sticks, and all her movements seemed full of piety. I approached noiselessly, and as I came by the door to the temple hall, I heard her whisper a prayer, "Buddha, please help my Lord break away from the sea of misery." I thought I must have heard wrong, but she chanted the prayer again. "Buddha, please help my Lord break away from the sea of misery." I didn't understand religion and had no interest in any of them, but I really couldn't think of any prayer odder than this one. "What are you saying?" I blurted. Xin ignored me. She kept her eyes barely closed, her hands clasped together in front of her, as though watching her prayer rise with the incense smoke toward the Buddha. After a long while, she finally opened her eyes and turned toward me. "Go to sleep. We have to get up early." She didn't even look at me. "This Lord you mentioned, is he part of Buddhism?" I asked. 164. Chapter 16. The three-body problem. No. Then. Xin said nothing, just hurried away. I didn't get a chance to ask anything else. I repeated the prayer to myself over and over, and it seemed to grow even stranger. Eventually, I became frightened. I rushed over to the abbot's room and knocked on his door. What does it mean if someone prays to the Buddha to help another lord? I then told him the details of what I saw. The abbot silently looked at the book in his hand, but he was thinking about what I said, not reading. Then he said, "Please leave me for a bit. Let me think." I turned and left, knowing that it was unusual. The abbot was very learned. Usually, he could answer any question about religion, history, and culture without having to think. I waited outside the door for about the time it took to smoke a cigarette, and the abbot called for me. "I think there's only one possibility." His expression was grim. "What? What could it be? Could there be some religion whose God needs worshippers to pray to the gods of other religions to save it? Her Lord really exists." This response confused me. Then. The Buddha doesn't exist? As soon as I said it, I realized how rude it sounded. I apologized. The abbot slowly waved his hand at me. "I told you, the two of us can't talk about Buddhism. The existence of the Buddha is a kind of existence that you cannot comprehend. But the Lord she's talking about exists in a way that you can understand. I can say no more concerning this matter. All I can do is counsel you against leaving with her." "Why?" "It's just a feeling. I feel that behind her are things that you and I cannot imagine." I left the abbot's room and walked through the temple toward my room. The night had a full moon. I looked up at it and thought it a silvery, strange eye that gazed down at me, the light suffused with an eerie chill. The next day, I did leave with Shen. I couldn't stay in the temple the rest of my life, after all. But I didn't think that over the next few years, I would live the life of my dreams. Shen fulfilled her promise. I had a mini-computer and a comfortable environment. I even left the country several times to use supercomputers, not time-sharing, but having the whole CPU to myself. She had a lot of money, though. I didn't know where it came from. Later, we got married. There wasn't much love or passion, just mutual convenience. We both had things we wanted to get done. As for me, the few years after that could be described as a single day. My time passed peacefully. In her house, I was taken care of and did not have to worry about food or clothing, so that I could devote myself to the study of the three-body problem. Shen never interfered with my life. The garage had a car that I could drive anywhere. I'm sure she wouldn't even have minded if I brought another woman home. She only paid attention to my research, and the only thing we talked about day to day was the three-body problem. Do you know what else Shen has been up to? Shi Chang asked. Just the frontiers of science. She's busy with it all the time. Lots of people show up every day. She didn't ask you to join? Never. She never even talks to me about it. I don't care either. That's just the way I am. I don't want to care about anything. She knows it, and says I'm an indolent man without any sense of purpose. The organization doesn't suit me and would interfere with my research. Have you made any progress with the three-body problem? Wang asked. Compared with the general state of the field, my progress could be said to be a breakthrough. Some years ago, Richard Montgomery of UCSC and Alain Chensener of University Paris Diderot discovered another stable, periodic solution to the three-body problem. Under appropriate initial conditions, the three bodies will chase each other around a fixed figure-8 curve. After that, everyone was keen to find such special stable configurations, and every discovery was greeted with joy. Only 3 or 4 such configurations have been found so far, but my evolutionary algorithm has already discovered more than 100 stable configurations. Drawings of their orbits would fill a gallery with postmodern art, but that's not my goal. The real solution to the three-body problem is to build a mathematical model so that, given any initial configuration with known vectors, the model can predict all subsequent motion of the three-body system. This is also what Shen Yufei craves. But my peaceful life ended yesterday. For details, please see Alain Chensener and Richard Montgomery, a remarkable periodic solution of the three-body problem in the case of equal masses, Annals of Mathematics, 152, 881, 901. 166. Chapter 16. The three-body problem. This is the crime you're reporting? Shi Chang asked. Yes. A man called yesterday and told me that if I didn't cease my research, I would be killed. Who was he? I don't know. Phone number? Don't know. Caller ID showed nothing. Anything related to report? Don't know. Deshir laughed and tossed his cigarette butt into an ashtray. You went on and on forever, and in the end all you have to report is one line and a few I don't knows. If I hadn't gone on like that, would you have understood the import of that call? Also, if that were all, I wouldn't have come here. I'm lazy, remember? But there was another thing. It was the middle of the night, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, and I was in bed. As I was drifting halfway between sleep and wakefulness, I felt something cold moving on my face. I opened my eyes and saw Shen Yufei, and I almost died of fright. What's so frightening about seeing your wife in the middle of the night? She stared at me in a way that I had never seen. The light from outside fell on her face, and she looked like a ghost. She held something in her hand, a gun. Moving the barrel over my face, she told me that I had to continue working on the three-body problem. Otherwise she'd kill me. Oh, now this is getting interesting. Deshir gave a satisfied nod. He lit another cigarette. Interesting. Look, I've nowhere to go. That's why I came to you. Tell us exactly what she said. She said, if you succeed in solving the three-body problem, you will be the savior of the world. If you stop now, you'll be a sinner. If someone were to save or destroy the human race, then your possible contribution or sin would be exactly twice as much as his. Deshir blew out a thick cloud of smoke and stared at Wei Cheng until he squirmed. He pulled a notepad out of the mess on his desk and picked up a pen. You wanted us to take notes, right? Repeat what you just said. Wei did. Wang said, what she said is indeed strange. What does she mean by exactly? Twice as much. Wei blinked. This seems pretty serious. When I came, the officer on duty immediately sent me to see you. It looks like you've already been paying attention to Shen and me. Deshir nodded. Let me ask you something else. Do you think the gun your wife held was real? He saw that Wei didn't know how to answer. Could you smell gun oil? Yes, there was definitely an oily smell. Good. Deshir, who had been sitting on his desk, jumped off. Finally, we have an opening. Suspected illegal possession of firearms is enough to justify a search. I'll leave the paperwork until tomorrow, because we have to move right away. He turned to Wang. No rest for the weary. I have to ask you to come and advise me some more. Then he turned to Su Bingbing, who'd been silent the whole time. Bingbing, right now I have only 2 men on duty, and that's not enough. I know the Information Security Division isn't used to fieldwork, but I need you to come along. Su nodded, glad to leave the smoke-filled office. In addition to Deshir and Su, the team for conducting the search consisted of Wang Miao, Wei Cheng, and 2 other officers from the criminal division. The 6 of them rode through the pre-dawn darkness in 2 police cars, heading toward Wei's neighborhood at the edge of the city. Su and Wang were in the back seat. As soon as the car started, she whispered to Wang, Professor Wang, your reputation in 3-body is very high. Somebody mentioned 3-body in the real world. Wang was excited, right away feeling close to this young woman in a police uniform. Do you play? I'm responsible for monitoring and tracking it. An unpleasant task. Wang anxiously asked, can you tell me its background? I really want to know. In the faint light coming through the car window, Wang saw Su give a mysterious smile. We want to know as well. But all its servers are outside the country. The system and firewall are very secure and hard to penetrate. We don't know much, but we can be sure it's not operated for profit. The software quality is uncommonly high, and the amount of information contained in it even more unusual. It doesn't even seem like a game. Have there been any? Wang carefully picked the right words. Supernatural signs. Wang's night had been filled with coincidences. He had been called into 168. Chapter 16. The 3-body problem. Discussed the 3-body problem with Wei Cheng immediately after he solved the 3-body game. And now Su was telling him she was monitoring the game. Something didn't seem right. We don't think so. Many from all around the world participate in the game's development. Their collaboration method seems similar to popular open-source practices, like the kind used to make the Linux operating system. But they're definitely using some very advanced development tools. As for the content of the game, who knows where they're getting it? It does seem a bit supernatural, like you said. However, we still believe in Captain Shir's famous rule, all this must be the work of people. Our tracking efforts are effective, and we'll have results soon. The young woman was not experienced in lying, and her last remark made Wang realize that she was hiding much of the truth from him. His rule is famous now. Wang looked at Deshir, who was in the driver's seat. When they reached the house, the sun had not yet risen. It was about the same time of night that Wang had seen Shen playing 3-body. A second-story window was lit, but all the other windows were dark. As soon as Wang got out of the car, he heard noises coming from upstairs. It sounded like something was slapping against the wall. Deshir, who had just gotten out of the car himself, immediately became alert. He kicked open the yard gate and rushed into the house with an agility surprising for his burly frame, his 3 colleagues close behind. Wang and Wei followed them into the house. They went upstairs and entered the room with a light on, their shoes splashing in a pool of blood. Shen lay in the middle of the room, blood still oozing from 2 bullet wounds in her chest. A 3rd bullet had gone through her left brow, causing her whole face to be covered in red. Not far from her, a gun lay in a crimson pool. As Wang entered, Desher and one of the other officers rushed out and entered the dark room across the hall. The window there was open, and Wang heard the sound of a car starting outside. A male police officer began to make a phone call. Su Bingbing stood a little ways apart, watching anxiously. She, like Wang and the others, had probably never seen a scene like this. A moment later, Desher returned. He put his gun back in its holster and said to the officer holding the phone, "A black Volkswagen Santana with only 1 man. I couldn't get the license plate number. Tell them to block all entrances to the 5th Ring Road." Shit. He might actually get away. Desher looked around and saw the bullet holes in the wall. He glanced at the shell casings scattered on the ground and added, "The man got off 5 shots, and 3 hit her. She shot twice, both misses." Then he crouched down to examine the body with the other officer. Su stood farther away, stealing a glance at Wei Qing next to her. Desher also looked up at him. On Wei's face was a trace of shock and a trace of sorrow, but only a trace. His usual wooden expression didn't break. He was far calmer than Wang. "You don't seem bothered by this," Desher said to Wei. "They probably came to kill you." Wei gave a ghastly grin. "What can I do? Even now, I still don't know anything about her. I've told her many times to keep life simple. I'm thinking of the abbot's counsel to me that night. But... Desher stood up and walked over to stand in front of Wei. He took out a cigarette and lit it. "I think you still have some things you haven't told us. Some things I was too lazy to talk about. Then you'd better work harder now." Wei thought for a moment and said, "Today, no, yesterday afternoon, she argued with a man in the living room. It's that Pan Han, the famous environmentalist. They had argued a few times before, in Japanese, as though afraid to have me listen in. But yesterday they didn't care at all and argued in Chinese. I overheard a few snatches. Try to tell us exactly what you heard." "Fine." Pan Han said, "Although we seem like fellow travelers on the surface, in reality we're irreconcilable enemies." Shen said, "Yes, you're trying to use our Lord's power against the human race." Pan said, "Your understanding is not completely unreasonable. We want our Lord to come to this world, to punish those who have long deserved it. However, you're working to prevent our Lord's coming, and that's why we can't tolerate you. If you don't stop, we'll make you stop." Shen said, "The commander was blind to allow you to join the organization." Pan said, "Speaking of, can you tell whether the commander sides with the Adventists or the Redemptionists? Does the commander want humanity eliminated or saved?" Pan's words briefly silenced Shen, and the two didn't argue so loudly anymore. "I couldn't hear anything else. What did the man who threatened you on the phone sound like?" "You're asking if he sounded like Pan Han?" "I don't know. He was speaking very softly, and I couldn't tell." Several more police cars arrived, sirens blaring. A group of white-gloved Ka. 170. Chapter 16. The Three-Body Problem. Lice men came upstairs with cameras, and the house hummed with activity. Desher told Wang to go back and get some rest. Instead, Wang walked into the room with the mini-computer to find Wei. "Can you give me an outline of your three-body evolutionary algorithm? I want to introduce it to some people. I know my request is abrupt. If you can't, don't worry about it." Wei took out a CD and handed it to Wang. "It's all on here, the whole model and additional documentation. Do me a favor and publish it under your own name. That would be a big help. No, no. How could I do that? Wei pointed at the disc in Wang's hand and said, Professor Wang, I noticed you the first time you came here. You're a good man, a man with a sense of responsibility. That's why I'm counseling you to stay away from this. The world is about to change. Everyone should try to live out the rest of their lives in peace. That would be best. Don't worry too much about other matters. It's all useless anyway. You seem to know even more than you let on. I spent every day with her. It's impossible to have no inkling. Then why not tell the police? Wei smiled contemptuously. The police are worthless. Even if God were here, it wouldn't do any good. The entire human race has reached the point where no one is listening to their prayers. Wei was standing next to an east-facing window. Through the glass, beyond the distant cityscape, the sky was brightening with the first light of dawn. For some reason, the light reminded Wang of the strange dawn he saw each time he logged on to 3-body. In reality, I'm not so detached. I haven't been able to sleep the last few nights. Every morning when I see the sunrise, it feels like sunset. He turned to Wang, and after a long pause, added, and it's all because God, or the Lord she talked about, can't even protect himself anymore. Chapter 17. 3-body, Newton, von Neumann, the first emperor, and trisolar syzygy. The start of the second level of 3-body wasn't too different than the first, still the strange, cold dawn, still that colossal pyramid. But this time, the pyramid was back in the Egyptian style. Wang heard the crisp sound of metal striking against metal. The clashing only highlighted the silence of the chilly dawn. Searching for the source, he saw 2 dark shadows flickering at the foot of the pyramid. In the dim light, metallic glints flashed between the shadows, a sword fight. Once his eyes had adjusted, Wang saw the figures more clearly. Based on the shape of the pyramid, this should be someplace in 3-body's version of the East, but the 2 fighters were Europeans dressed in a 16th or 17th century style. The shorter one ducked below a swinging sword and his silvery wig fell to the ground. After a few more thrusts and parries, another man appeared around the corner of the pyramid and ran toward the fighters. He tried to get the 2 to stop, but the swinging blades whistling through the air prevented him from getting close. He shouted, "Stop! Don't you 2 have anything better to do? Where's your 172. Chapter 17. 3-body 4. Sense of responsibility. If civilization has no future, what good is this supposed bit of glory you're fighting over? Both sword fighters ignored him, concentrating on the duel. The taller one suddenly cried out in pain, and his sword fell to the ground with a clang. He turned and ran, holding his wounded arm. The other gave chase for a few steps and spat in the direction of the loser. Shameless. He bent down to pick up his wig. As he straightened up, he saw Wang. Pointing in the direction of the escapee, he said, he dared to claim that he invented calculus. He put on his wig, put a hand over his heart, and bowed courteously to Wang. Isaac Newton, at your service. Then the one who ran away must be Leibniz? Wang asked. Indeed, an unscrupulous man. I don't really care about this little claim to fame. Inventing the 3 laws of mechanics has already made me the greatest, God accepted. From planetary motion to cell division, everything follows the 3 great laws. Now, with the powerful mathematical tool that is calculus, it will only be a matter of time before we master the pattern of the motion of the 3 suns. It's not that simple, said the man who had tried to stop the fight. Have you considered the amount of calculation that's needed? I saw the differential equations you listed, and I don't think an analytical solution is possible, only a numerical one. However, the calculating capacity required is such that even if all of the world's mathematicians worked without pause, they'd still not be able to complete them by the time the world ended. Of course, if we can't figure out the pattern of the sun's movement soon, the end of the world will not be too far away. He bowed at Wang as well, a more modern bow. Von Neumann. Didn't you bring us thousands of miles to the east specifically to solve the problem of calculating these equations? Newton asked. Then he turned to Wang. Norbert Wiener and that degenerate who just ran away also came with us. We encountered some pirates near Madagascar. Wiener fought the pirates by himself so that the rest of us could escape, and he died valiantly. Why did you have to come to the east to build a computer? Wang asked von Neumann. Von Neumann and Newton looked at each other, puzzled. A computer? A computing machine. Such a thing exists? You don't know about computers? Then what did you have in mind for completing the vast amount of calculations? Von Neumann stared at Wang with wide-open eyes, as though his question made no sense. Using people, of course. Other than people, what else in the world is capable of performing calculations? But you just said that all the mathematicians in the world wouldn't be enough. Instead of mathematicians, we'll use common laborers. But we need many of them, at least 30 million. We'll do mathematics using human wave tactics. Common laborers? 30 million? Wang was amazed. But if I recall correctly, this is an age when 90% of the population are illiterate. Yet you want to find 30 million people who understand calculus? Have you heard the joke about the army of Sichuan? Von Neumann took out a thick cigar, bit off the end, and lit it. Some soldiers were being drilled, but because they had no education, they couldn't even follow the drill instructor's simple orders to march left right left. So the instructor came up with a solution. He had every soldier wear a straw shoe on the left foot and a cloth shoe on the right. When they marched, he shouted, here he switched to a Sichuan accent, straw cloth straw cloth. That's the kind of soldier we need. Except we need 30 million of them. Hearing this modern joke, Wang knew that the man before him wasn't a program but a real person, and almost certainly Chinese. It's hard to imagine such a large army, Wang said, shaking his head. That's why we've come to see Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. Newton pointed at the pyramid. He's still in charge. Wang looked around. He saw that the soldiers guarding the entrance to the pyramid really were equipped with the simple leather armor and G-style halberds of the Qin dynasty. The anachronistic mix of historical elements in three-body no longer surprised him. The whole world is going to be under his rule because he has an army of more than 30 million preparing to conquer Europe. All right, let's go see him. Von Neumann turned to Newton, dropped the sword. Newton obeyed. The three of them entered the pyramid, and just as they were about to emerge from the tunnel into the great hall, a guard insisted that they strip off all their clothes. Newton objected. We're famous scholars. No one of our stature would carry hidden weapons. As the two sides explored the stalemate, a deep, male voice came from the great hall. Is it the foreigner who discovered the three laws of motion? Let him and his companions in. They entered the great hall. The first emperor was pacing back and forth. 174. Chapter 17. Three Body 4. His robe and his famous long sword both dragging along the ground. As he turned to gaze at the three scholars, Wang realized that his eyes were the same as the eyes of King Zhou of Shang and Pope Gregory. I already know the purpose of your visit. You're Europeans. Why not go find Caesar? His empire is vast. Surely he can find you 30 million men. But my most honored emperor, do you know what kind of army he has? Do you know what shape his empire is in? In the magnificent eternal city of Rome, even the river that flows through the city has been heavily polluted. Do you know the cause? Military-industrial production? No, great emperor, it's the vomit from Romans after their binge and purge feasts. When the nobles attend the feasts, stretchers have already been prepared for them under the tables. When they've eaten so much that they can no longer move, the servants carry them home. The entire empire has sunk into a quagmire of extravagance from which they cannot extricate themselves. Even if Caesar could organize an army of 30 million, it would not have the quality and strength necessary to perform this great calculation. I am aware of that, Qin Shi Huang said. But Caesar is waking up and reinvigorating his army. The wisdom of Westerners is terrifying. You are not more intelligent than the men of the East, but you can see the right path. For example, Copernicus could figure out that there are 3 suns, and you could come up with your 3 laws. These are very impressive accomplishments. We here in the East cannot, for now, match them. I don't possess the ability to conquer Europe. My ships are not good enough, and the supply lines cannot be maintained for long enough to go over land. That's why your empire must continue to develop, great emperor. Von Neumann seized the opportunity. If you can master the pattern of the sun's movements, you will be able to make the most of each stable era, and also avoid the damage brought by each chaotic era. This way, your progress will be much faster than Europe's. Believe us, we're scholars. As long as we can use the 3 laws of motion and calculus to accurately forecast the movements of the suns, we do not care who conquers the world. Of course I need to predict the sun's movements. But if you want me to gather 30 million men, you must at least demonstrate for me how such calculations would be conducted. Your Imperial Majesty, please give me 3 soldiers. I will demonstrate. Von Neumann grew excited. 3. Only 3. I can easily give you 3,000. Qin Shi Huang glanced at von Neumann, distrustful. Your Imperial Majesty, you mentioned just now the defect in the Eastern mind when it comes to scientific thinking. This is because you have not realized that even the complicated objects of the universe are made from the simplest elements. I only need 3. Qin Shi Huang waved his hand and 3 soldiers came forward. They were all very young. Like other Qin soldiers, they moved like order-obeying machines. I don't know your names, von Neumann said, tapping the shoulders of 2 of the soldiers. The 2 of you will be responsible for signal input, so I'll call you Input 1 and Input 2. He pointed to the last soldier. You will be responsible for signal output, so I'll call you Output. He shoved the soldiers to where he wanted them to stand, form a triangle. Like this. Output is the apex. Input 1 and Input 2 form the base. You could have just told them to stand in the wedge attack formation, Qin Shi Huang said, glancing at von Neumann contemptuously. Newton took out 6 small flags, 3 white, 3 black. Von Neumann handed them out to the 3 soldiers so that each held a black flag and a white flag. White represents 0, black represents 1. Good. Now, listen to me. Output, you turn around and look at Input 1 and Input 2. If they both raise black flags, you raise a black flag as well. Under all other circumstances, you raise the white flag. I think you should use some other color, Qin Shi Huang said. White means surrender. The excited von Neumann ignored him. He shouted orders at the 3 soldiers. Begin operation. Input 1 and Input 2, you can raise whichever flag you want. Good. Raise. Good. Raise again. Raise. Input 1 and Input 2 raised their flags 3 times. The first time they were black-black, the second time white-black, and the third time black-white. Output reacted correctly each time, raising the black flag once and the white one twice. Very good. Your Imperial Majesty, your soldiers are very smart. Even an idiot would be capable of that. Tell me, what are they really doing? Qin Shi Huang looked baffled. The 3 soldiers form a computing component. It's a type of gate, an gate. Von Neumann paused to let the Emperor digest this information. Qin Shi Huang said impassively, I'm not impressed. Continue. 176. Chapter 17. 3 Body 4. Von Neumann turned to the 3 soldiers again. Let's form another component. You, Output, if you see either Input 1 or Input 2 raise a black flag, you raise the black flag. There are 3 situations where that will be true, black-black, white-black, black-white. When it's white-white, you raise the white flag. Understand? Good lad, you're really clever. You're the key to the correct functioning of the gate. Work hard, and the Emperor will reward you. Let's begin operation. Raise. Good, raise again. Raise again. Perfect. Your Imperial Majesty, this component is called an OR gate. Then, von Neumann used the 3 soldiers to form a NAND gate, a NOR gate, an XOR gate, an XNOR gate, and a tristate gate. Finally, using only 2 soldiers, he made the simplest gate, a NOT gate, or an inverter. Output always raised the flag that was opposite in color from the one raised by input. Von Neumann bowed to the Emperor. Now, Your Imperial Majesty, all the gate components have been demonstrated. Aren't they simple? Any 3 soldiers can master the skills after 1 hour of training. Don't they need to learn more? Qin Shi Huang asked. No. We can form 10 million of these gates, and then put the components together into a system. This system will then be able to carry out the calculations we need and work out those differential equations for predicting the sun's movements. We could call the system a computer, Wang said. Ah, good. Von Neumann gave Wang a thumbs up. Computer, that's a great name. The entire system is a large machine, the most complex machine in the history of the world. The passage of in-game time sped up. 3 months went by. Qin Shi Huang, Newton, von Neumann, and Wang all stood on the platform at the apex of the pyramid. This platform was similar to the one where Wang had met Mosey. It was filled with astronomical instruments, some of which were of recent European design. Below them, a magnificent phalanx of 30 million Qin soldiers was arrayed on the ground. The entire formation fit inside a square 6 kilometers on each side. As the sun rose, the phalanx remained still like a giant carpet made of 30 million terracotta warriors. But when a flock of birds wandered above the phalanx, the birds immediately felt the potential for death from below and scattered anxiously in chaos. Wang performed some computations in his head and realized that even if the entire population of Earth were arranged into such a phalanx, the whole formation would fit inside the Huangpu district of Shanghai. Though it was powerful, the phalanx also revealed the fragility of civilization. Von Neumann said, Your Imperial Majesty, your army is truly matchless. In an extremely short time, we have completed such complex training. Qin Shi Huang held on to the hilt of his long sword. Even though the whole is complex, what each soldier must do is very simple. Compared to the training they went through to learn how to break the Macedonian phalanx, this is nothing. Newton added, and God blessed us with 2 consecutive stable eras to get them trained and ready. Even in a chaotic era, my army continues to train. They will finish your calculations even if it's a chaotic era. Qin Shi Huang glanced over the phalanx with pride in his eyes. Then, Your Imperial Majesty, please give the great order. Von Neumann's voice trembled with excitement. Qin Shi Huang nodded. A guard ran over, grabbed the hilt of the Emperor's sword, and stepped backwards. The bronze sword was so long that it was impossible for the Emperor himself to pull it out of the scabbard. The guard knelt and handed the sword to the Emperor. Qin Shi Huang lifted the sword to the sky, and shouted, Computer formation. 4 giant bronze cauldrons at the corners of the platform came to life simultaneously with roaring flames. A group of soldiers standing on the sloping side of the pyramid facing the phalanx chanted in unison, Computer formation. On the ground below, colors in the phalanx began to shift and move. Complicated and detailed circuit patterns appeared and gradually filled the entire formation. 10 minutes later, the army had made a 36-kilometer square computer motherboard. Von Neumann pointed to the gigantic human circuit below the pyramid and began to explain, Your Imperial Majesty, we have named this computer Qi. Look, there in the center is the CPU, the core computing component, formed from your 5 best divisions. By referencing this diagram, you can locate the adders, registers, and stack memory. The part around it that looks highly regular is the memory. When we built that part, we found that we didn't have enough soldiers. But luckily, the work done by the elements in this component is the simplest, so we trained each soldier to hold more colored flags. Each man can now complete the work that initially required 20 men. This allowed us to increase the memory capacity to meet the minimum requirements for running the 178. Chapter 17. 3-Body 4. Qin 1.0 Operating System. Observe also the open passage that runs through the entire formation, and the light cavalry waiting for orders in that passage. That's the system bus, responsible for transmitting information between the components of the whole system. The bus architecture is a great invention. New plug-in components, which can be made from up to 10 divisions, can quickly be added to the main operation bus. This allows Qin I's hardware to be easily expanded and upgraded. Look further still, you might have to use the telescope for this, and there's the external storage, which we call the hard drive at Copernicus's suggestion. It's formed by 3 million soldiers with more education than most. When you buried all those scholars alive after you unified China, it's a good thing you saved these ones. Each of them holds a pen and a notepad, and they're responsible for recording the results of the calculations. Of course, the bulk of their work is to act as virtual memory and store intermediate calculation results. They're the bottleneck for the speed of computation. And, finally, the part that's closest to us is the display. It's capable of showing us in real time the most important parameters of the computation. Von Neumann and Newton carried over a large scroll, tall as a man, and spread it open before Qin Shi Huang. When they reached the scroll's end, Huang's chest tightened, remembering the legend of the assassin who hid a dagger in a map scroll that he then displayed to the emperor. But the imaginary dagger did not appear. Before them was only a large sheet of paper filled with symbols, each the size of a fly's head. Packed so densely, the symbols were as dazzling to behold as the computer formation on the ground below. Your Imperial Majesty, this is the Qin 1.0 operating system we developed. The software for doing the calculations will run on top of it. That below, von Neumann pointed to the human formation computer, is the hardware. What's on this paper is the software. The relationship between hardware and software is like that between the Guqin zither and sheet music. He and Newton then spread open another scroll, just as large. Your Imperial Majesty, this is the software for using numerical methods to solve those differential equations. After entering the motion vectors of the three suns at a particular moment obtained by astronomical observation, the software's operation will give us a prediction for the sun's subsequent motion at any moment in the future. Our first computation will calculate all the sun's positions for the next 2 years. Each set of output values will be 120 hours apart. Qin Shi Huang nodded. Good. Begin. Von Neumann lifted both hands above his head and solemnly chanted, as ordered by the great emperor, turn on the computer. System self-test. A row of soldiers standing halfway down the face of the pyramid repeated the order using flag signals. In a moment, the motherboard made of 30 million men seemed to turn into a lake filled with sparkling lights. Tens of millions of tiny flags waved. In the display formation closest to the base of the pyramid, a progress bar made of numerous green flags slowly advanced, indicating the percentage of the self-test that had been completed. 10 minutes later, the progress bar reached its end. Self-test complete. Begin boot sequence. Load operating system. Below, the light cavalry on the main bus that passed through the entire human formation computer began to move swiftly. The main bus soon turned into a turbulent river. Along the way, the river fed into numerous thin tributaries, infiltrating all the modular subformations. Soon, the ripple of black and white flags coalesced into surging waves that filled the entire motherboard. The central CPU area was the most tumultuous, like gunpowder on fire. But suddenly, as though the powder had been exhausted, the movements in the CPU slackened and eventually stopped. Starting with the CPU in the center, the stillness spread in every direction, like a sea being frozen over. Finally, the entire motherboard came to a stop, with only a few scattered components flashing lifelessly in infinite loops. The center of the display formation blinked red. System lockup, a signal officer called out. Shortly after, the reason for the malfunction was determined, there was an error with the operation of one of the gates in the CPU status register. Restart system. Von Neumann ordered confidently. Wait. Newton stopped the signal officer. He turned with an insidious expression and said to Qin Shi Huang, Your Imperial Majesty, in order to improve system stability, you should take certain maintenance measures with respect to faulty components. Qin Shi Huang grasped his sword and said, Replace the malfunctioning component and behead all the soldiers who made up that gate. In the future, any malfunctions will be dealt with the same way. Von Neumann glanced at Newton, disgusted. They watched as a few riders dashed into the motherboard with their swords unsheathed. After they repaired the faulty component, the order to restart was given. This time, the operation went very smoothly. 20 minutes later, 3 bodies von Neumann architecture. 180. Chapter 17. 3 Body 4. Human Formation Computer had begun full operations under the Qin 1.0 operating system. Run Solar Orbit Computation Software 3 Body 1.0. Newton screamed at the top of his lungs. Start the Master Computing Module. Load the Differential Calculus Module. Load the Finite Element Analysis Module. Load the Spectral Method Module. Enter initial condition parameters. And begin calculation. The motherboard sparkled as the display formation flashed with indicators in every color. The Human Formation Computer began the long computation. This is really interesting, Qin Shi Huang said, pointing to the spectacular sight. Each individual's behavior is so simple, yet together, they can produce such a complex, great whole. Europeans criticize me for my tyrannical rule, claiming that I suppress creativity. But in reality, a large number of men yoked by severe discipline can also produce great wisdom when bound together as one. Great First Emperor, this is just the mechanical operation of a machine, not wisdom. Each of these lowly individuals is just a zero. Only when someone like you is added to the front as a one can the whole have any meaning. Newton's smile was ingratiating. Disgusting philosophy. Von Neumann said as he glanced at Newton, if, in the end, the results computed in accordance with your theory and mathematical model don't match reality, then you and I aren't even zeros. Indeed. If that turns out to be the case, you will be nothing. Qin Shi Huang turned and left the scene. Time passed quickly. The Human Formation Computer operated for a year and 4 months. Subtracting out the time spent to adjust the programming, the actual processing time was approximately a year and 2 months. During this time, processing had to be stopped twice due to extremely bad weather in chaotic eras. But the computer stored the data at the time of each shutdown, and was able to resume calculations successfully after the pauses. By the time Qin Shi Huang and the European scholars ascended the pyramid again, the first phase of the computation was complete. The results precisely described the orbits of the 3 suns for the next 2 years. It was a chilly dawn. The torches that had kept the motherboard lit through the night were extinguished. After the final calculation, Qin I entered standby mode. The turbulent waves over the motherboard settled into light ripples. Von Neumann and Newton presented the scroll with the results of the computation to Qin Shi Huang. Newton said, Great First Emperor, the calculations were completed 3 days ago. We waited until now to present the results to you because they show that the long night is about to be over. We'll soon welcome the first sunrise of a long stable era, which will last more than a year. Judging by the orbital parameters, the climate will be extremely mild and comfortable. Please revive your empire and order everyone to be rehydrated. Ever since the start of this computation, my empire has never been dehydrated, Qin Shi Huang said in a huff, grabbing the scroll. I've devoted all the resources of the Qin Empire to maintain the operation of the computer, and we've run out of stored supplies. For this computer, countless people have died of hunger, cold, and heat. Qin pointed into the distance with the scroll. By the dim dawnlight, they could see tens of white lines radiating from the edges of the motherboard in every direction, disappearing over the horizon. These were the supply routes from every corner of the empire. Your Imperial Majesty, you will find that the sacrifices are worth it, von Neumann said. After mastering the orbits of the suns, Qin will develop by leaps and bounds, and will grow many times more powerful than before. According to the calculations, the sun is about to rise. Great First Emperor, prepare to receive your glory. As if in response to Newton's words, a sliver of red sun peeked over the horizon, bathing the pyramid and the human formation computer in a golden light. A wave of joyous cries rose from the motherboard. A man hurried toward them. He was running so fast that, as he knelt down, he couldn't catch his breath. He was the Emperor's astronomy minister. Sire, the calculations were in error. Disaster is about to befall us. What are you babbling about? Without even waiting for the Emperor to speak, Newton kicked the man. Don't you see that the sun is rising at the exact moment predicted by our precise calculations? But... The minister half straightened, one hand pointing at the sun. How many suns do you see? Everyone gazed at the rising sun, confused. Minister, you received a proper Western education and obtained a doctorate from the University of Cambridge, von Neumann said. You must at least know how to count. Of course there's only one sun in the sky. And the temperature is very comfortable. No. There are 3. The minister cried, tears flowing from his face. The 182. Chapter 17. 3 body 4. Other 2 are behind that one. Everyone stared at the sun again, still confused. The Imperial Observatory has confirmed that right now we are experiencing the extremely rare phenomenon of a trisolar syzygy. The 3 suns are in a straight line, moving around our planet at the same angular speed. Thus, our planet and the 3 suns are in a straight line with our world at the end. You're certain that the observation is not an error? Newton grabbed the collar of the astronomy minister. Absolutely certain. The observation was conducted by the Western astronomers of the Imperial Observatory, including Kepler and Herschel. They're using the largest telescope in the world, imported from Europe. Newton let go of the minister and stood up. Wang saw that his face was pale, but his expression was one of pure joy. He clasped his 2 hands in front of his chest and said to Qin Shi Huang, O greatest, most honorable emperor, this is the most propitious sign of them all. Now that the 3 suns are orbiting around our planet, your empire is the center of the universe. This is God's reward for our efforts. Let me check the calculations one more time. I will prove this. While the rest remained stunned, Newton slipped away. Later, others would report that Sir Isaac had stolen a horse and left for parts unknown. An anxiety-filled moment of silence later, Wang suddenly said, Your Imperial Majesty, please unsheath your sword. What do you want? Qin Shi Huang asked, baffled. But he gestured at the soldier by his side, and the soldier pulled the sword out of its scabbard. Wang said, Please try to swing it. Qin Shi Huang held the sword and waved it around. His expression turned to one of surprise. Oh, why is it so light? The game's V-suit cannot simulate the feeling of diminished gravity. Otherwise we'd feel that we're much lighter as well. Look! Down there! Look at the horses, and the men! Someone cried out. Everyone looked down and saw a column of cavalry moving at the foot of the pyramid. All the horses seemed to be floating. Each horse drifted over a long distance before the forehooves struck ground again. They also saw several running men. With each step, the men leapt a dozen meters, falling slowly back to the ground. On top of the pyramid, a soldier tried to jump up, and easily reached the height of 3 meters. What is going on? Qin Shi Huang looked at the soldier slowly falling back. Down! Sire, the 3 suns are over our planet in a straight line, so their gravitational forces are added together. The astronomy minister tried to explain, but discovered that his 2 feet had already left the ground and he was now horizontal. The others were also floating in the air, leaning at different angles. Like a bunch of men who had fallen into water without knowing how to swim, they clumsily waved their limbs, trying to stabilize themselves but colliding into each other instead. The ground they had just left now cracked open like a spiderweb. The cracks grew fast, and, accompanied by thunderous crashes and sky-obscuring dust, the pyramid below them broke into its constituent blocks. Through the slowly drifting gigantic blocks, Wang saw the great hall below come apart. The large cauldron that had once cooked Fu Shi and the iron stake to which he had once been bound were both adrift. The sun rose to the middle of the sky. Everything that floated, men, colossal blocks of stone, astronomical instruments, bronze cauldrons, began to rise slowly, then accelerated. Wang glanced at the human formation computer and saw a nightmarish sight. The 30 million men who had formed the motherboard were floating away from the earth and rising, like a swarm of ants sucked up by a vacuum cleaner. The ground they left behind clearly displayed the marks of the motherboard circuits. The set of intricate, complex markings that could only be taken in from a great height would become an archaeological site that would confuse the next three-body civilization, in the distant future. Wang looked up. The sky was obscured by a strangely mottled layer of clouds. The clouds were made of dust, stones, humans, and other odds and ends. The sun sparkled behind them. In the far distance, Wang saw a long range of transparent mountains also rising up. The mountains were crystal clear, and changed shapes as they sparkled. They were formed from the ocean, which was also being attracted into space. Everything on the surface of the three-body world rose toward the sun. Wang looked around and saw von Neumann and Qin Shi Huang. As he drifted, von Neumann shouted at Qin Shi Huang, but there was no sound. A small set of subtitles appeared. I figured it out. Electronic elements. We can use electronic elements to make gate circuits and combine them into computers. Such computers will be many times faster and take up much less space. I estimate that a small building will be sufficient. Your Imperial Majesty, are you listening? Qin Shi Huang swung his long sword at von Neumann. The latter kicked at a 184. Chapter 17. Three-body 4. Giant block of stone drifting nearby and dodged out of the way. The long sword struck the stone, causing sparks to fly, and broke itself into two pieces. Right after, the giant block of stone collided with another, with Qin Shi Huang in the middle. Stone chips and flesh and blood scattered everywhere, an appalling sight, but Wang did not hear the noise made by colliding stones. Around him it was completely silent. Because the atmosphere was gone, there was no more sound. As the bodies drifted, their blood boiled in the vacuum and their inner organs were vomited out, until they turned into strange blobs surrounded by crystalline clouds made from the liquid they exuded. Also, due to the lack of an atmosphere, the sky turned pitch black. Everything that had floated into space from the three-body world reflected the sunlight and formed a brilliant, starry cloud in space. The cloud then turned into a giant vortex, spiraling toward its final resting place. The sun. Wang now saw the sun changing shape. He understood that he was actually seeing the other two suns, both peeking out from behind the first sun. From this perspective, the three stacked suns formed a bright eye in the universe. Against the background of the three suns in syzygy, text appeared. Civilization number 184 was destroyed by the stacked gravitational attractions of a trisolar syzygy. This civilization had advanced to the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. In this civilization, Newton established non-relativistic classical mechanics. At the same time, due to the invention of calculus and the von Neumann architecture computer, the foundation was set for the quantitative mathematical analysis of the motion of three bodies. After a long time, life and civilization will begin once more, and progress through the unpredictable world of three-body. We invite you to log on again. Just as Wang logged out of the game, a stranger called. The voice on the phone was that of a very charismatic man. Hello. First, we thank you for giving us your real number. I'm a system administrator for the three-body game. Wang was both excited and anxious. Please tell us your age, education, employer, and position. You didn't fill those out when you registered. What do they have to do with the game? When you've reached this level, you must provide these pieces of information. If you refuse, 3-body will be permanently closed to you. Wang answered the administrator's questions truthfully. Very good, Professor Wang. You satisfy the conditions for continuing in 3-body. Thank you. Can I ask you a few questions? You may not. But tomorrow night there will be a meet-up for 3-body players. We welcome you to attend. The administrator gave Wang an address. 186. Chapter 17. 3-body 4. Chapter 18. Meet-up. The location for the 3-body players' meet-up was a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop. Wang had always imagined game meetups would be lively events full of people, but this meetup consisted of only 7 players, including himself. Like Wang, the other 6 did not look like gaming enthusiasts. Only 2 were relatively young. Another 3, including a woman, were middle-aged. There was also an old man who appeared to be in his 60s or 70s. Wang had originally thought that as soon as they met they'd begin a lively discussion of 3-body, but he was wrong. The profound but strange content of 3-body had had a psychological impact on the participants. All the players, including Wang himself, couldn't bring it up easily. They only made simple self-introductions. The old man took out a refined pipe, filled it with tobacco, and smoked as he strolled around, admiring the paintings on the walls. The others sat silently, waiting for the meetup organizer to show up. They had all come early, actually. Of the 6, Wang already knew 2. The old man was a famous scholar who had made his name by imbuing Eastern philosophy with the content of modern science. The strangely dressed woman was a famous writer, one of those rare novelists who wrote in an avant-garde style but still had many readers. You could start one of her books on any page. Of the 2 middle-aged men, one was a vice president at China's largest software company, plainly and casually dressed so that his status wasn't obvious at all, and the other was a high-level executive at the State Power Corporation. Of the 2 young men, one was a reporter with a major media outlet, and the other was a doctoral student in the sciences. Wang now realized that a considerable number of 3-body players were probably social elites like them. 188. Chapter 18. Meet-up. The meet-up organizer showed up not long after. Wang's heart began to beat faster as soon as he saw the man. It was Pan Han, prime suspect for the murder of Xin Yufei. He took out his phone when no one was looking and texted Shirchan. Everyone got here early. Pan greeted them in a relaxed manner, as though nothing was wrong. Appearing in the media, he usually looked disheveled, like a vagrant, but today, he was dressed sharply in a suit and dress shoes. You're just like I imagined. 3-body is intended for people in your class because the common crowd cannot appreciate its meaning and mood. To play it well requires knowledge and understanding that ordinary people do not possess. Wang sent out his text, spotted Pan Han at Yunhe Coffee Shop in Xiqing District. Pan continued. Everyone here is an excellent 3-body player. You have the best scores and are devoted to it. I believe that 3-body is already an important part of your lives. It's part of what keeps me alive, the young doctoral student said. I saw it by accident on my grandson's computer, the old philosopher said, lifting his pipe stem. The young man abandoned it after a few tries, saying it was too abstruse. But I was attracted to it. I find it strange, terrible, but also beautiful. So much information is hidden beneath a simple representation. A few players nodded at this description, including Wang himself. Wang received Deshire's reply text, we also see him. No worries. Carry on. Play the fanatic in front of them, but not so much that you can't pull it off. Yes, the author agreed, and nodded. I like the literary elements of 3-body. The rises and falls of 203 civilizations evoke the qualities of epics in a new form. She mentioned 203 civilizations, but Wang had only experienced 184. This told Wang that 3-body progressed independently for each player, possibly with different worlds. I'm a bit sick of the real world, the young reporter said. 3-body is already my second reality. Really? Pan asked, interested. Me too, the software company vice president said. Compared to 3-body, reality is so vulgar and unexciting. It's too bad that it's only a game, said the power company executive. Very good, Pan said. Wang noticed his eyes sparkling with excitement. I have a question that I think everyone wants to know the answer to, Wang said. I know what it is. But you might as well ask. Is 3-body only a game? The other players nodded. Clearly the question was also on their minds. Pan stood up and said solemnly, the world of 3-body, or Trisolaris, really does exist. Where is it? Several players asked in unison. After looking at each of them in turn, Pan sat down and spoke. Some questions I can answer. Others I cannot. But if you are meant to be with Trisolaris, all your questions will be answered someday. Then, does the game really portray Trisolaris accurately? The reporter asked. First, the ability of Trisolarans to dehydrate through its many cycles of civilization is real. In order to adapt to the unpredictable natural environment and avoid extreme environmental conditions unsuitable for life, they can completely expel the water in their bodies and turn into dry, fibrous objects. What do Trisolarans look like? Pan shook his head. I don't know. I really don't. In every cycle of civilization, the appearance of Trisolarans is different. However, the game does portray something else that really existed on Trisolaris, the Trisolar Information Computer. Ha! I thought that was the most unrealistic aspect, the software company vice president said. I conducted a test with more than 100 employees at my company. Even if the idea worked, a computer made of people would probably operate at a speed slower than manual computation. Pan gave a mysterious smile. You're right. But suppose that of the 30 million soldiers forming the computer, each one is capable of raising and lowering the black and white flags 100,000 times per second, and suppose also that the light cavalry soldiers on the main bus can run at several times the speed of sound, or even faster. Then the result would be very different. You asked about the appearance of the Trisolarans just now. According to some signs, the bodies of the Trisolarans who formed the computer were covered by a purely reflective surface, which probably evolved as a response to survival under extreme conditions of sunlight. The mirror-like surface could be deformed into any shape, and they communicated with each other by focusing light with their bodies. This kind of light speech could transmit information extremely rapidly and was the foundation of the Trisolar Information Computer. Of course, this was still a 190. Chapter 18. Meet up. Very inefficient machine, but it was capable of completing calculations that were too difficult to be performed manually. The computer did in fact make its first appearance in Trisolaris as formations of people, before becoming mechanical and then electronic. Pan stood up and paced behind the players. As a game, 3-body only borrows the background of human society to simulate the development of Trisolaris. This is done to give players a familiar environment. The real Trisolaris is very different from the world of the game, but the existence of the 3 suns is real. They're the foundation of the Trisolaran environment. Developing this game must have cost an enormous amount of effort, the vice president said. But the goal is clearly not profit. The goal of 3-body is very simple and pure, to gather those of us who have common ideals, Pan said. What ideals do we have in common, exactly? Wang immediately regretted the question. He wondered whether asking it sounded hostile. Pan studied everyone meaningfully, and then added in a soft voice, how would you feel if Trisolaran civilization were to enter our world? I would be happy. The young reporter was the first to break the silence. I've lost hope in the human race after what I've seen in recent years. Human society is incapable of self-improvement, and we need the intervention of an outside force. I agree, the author shouted. She was very excited, as though finally finding an outlet for pent-up feelings. The human race is hideous. I've spent the first half of my life unveiling this ugliness with the scalpel of literature, but now I'm even sick of the work of dissection. I yearn for Trisolaran civilization to bring real beauty to this world. Pan said nothing. That glint of excitement appeared in his eyes again. The old philosopher waved his pipe, which had gone out. He spoke with a serious mien. Let's discuss this question with a bit more depth. What is your impression of the Aztecs? Dark and bloody, the author said. Blood-drenched pyramids lit by insidious fires seen through dark forests. Those are my impressions. The philosopher nodded. Very good. Then try to imagine, if the Spanish conquistadors did not intervene, what would have been the influence of that civilization on human history? You're calling black white and white black, the software company vice president said. The conquistadors who invaded the Americas were nothing more than murderers and robbers. Even so, at least they prevented the Aztecs from developing without bound, turning the Americas into a bloody, dark great empire. Then civilization as we know it wouldn't have appeared in the Americas, and democracy wouldn't have thrived until much later. Indeed, maybe they wouldn't have appeared at all. This is the key to the question. No matter what the Trisolarans are like, their arrival will be good news for the terminally ill human race. But have you thought through the fact that the Aztecs were completely destroyed by the Western invaders? The power company executive asked. He looked around, as though seeing these people for the first time. Your thoughts are very dangerous. You mean profound, the doctoral student said, raising a finger. He nodded vigorously at the philosopher. I had the same thought, but I didn't know how to express it. You said it so well. After a moment of silence, Pan turned to Wang. The other 6 have all given their views. What about you? I stand with them, Wang said, pointing to the reporter and the philosopher. He kept his answer simple. The less said the better. Very good, Pan said. He turned to the software company vice president and the power company executive. The 2 of you are no longer welcome at this meetup, and you are no longer appropriate players for 3-body. Your IDs will be deleted. Please leave now. Thank you. The 2 stood up and looked at each other, then glanced around, confused, and left. Pan held out his hand to the remaining 5, shaking each person's hand in turn. Then he said, solemnly, we are comrades now. 192. Chapter 18. Meet up. Chapter 19. 3-body, Einstein, the Pendulum Monument, and the Great Rip. The 5th time Wang Miao logged on to 3-body, it was dawn as usual, but the world was unrecognizable. The Great Pyramid that had appeared the first 4 times had been destroyed by the trisolar syzygy. In its place was a tall, modern building, whose dark gray shape was familiar to Wang, the United Nations headquarters. In the distance were many more tall buildings, apparently dehydrotories. All had completely reflective mirror surfaces. In the dawn light they appeared as giant crystal plants growing out of the ground. Wang heard a violin playing something by Mozart. The playing wasn't very practiced, but there was a special charm to it, as though saying, I play for myself. The violinist was a homeless old man sitting on the steps in front of the UN headquarters, his fluffy silver hair fluttering in the wind. Next to his feet was an old top hat containing some scattered change. Wang suddenly noticed the sun. But it rose in the opposite direction from the dawn light, and the patch of the sky around it was still completely dark. The sun was very large, its half-risen disk taking up a third of the horizon. Wang's heart beat faster. Such a large sun could only mean another great catastrophe. But when Wang turned around, the old man continued to play as though nothing odd was happening. His silver hair shone brilliantly in the sun, as though. 194. Chapter 19. 3-body V. It was on fire. The sun was silvery, just like the old man's hair. It cast a pale white light over the ground, but Wang couldn't feel any warmth from the light. He gazed at the sun, which had now completely risen. On the giant silver disk he could pick out lines like wood grains, mountain ranges. Wang realized that the disk did not emit light. It only reflected the light from the real sun, which was on the other side of the sky, below the horizon. What had risen wasn't a sun at all, but a giant moon. The giant moon moved briskly up the sky at a pace that could be detected by the naked eye. In the process, it gradually waned from a full to a half moon, and then a crescent. The old man's soothing violin strains drifted on the cold morning breeze. The majestic sight of the universe was like the music-made material. Wang was intoxicated. The giant crescent now fell into the dawn light and grew much brighter. When only two glowing tips remained above the horizon, Wang imagined them as the tips of the horns of a titanic bull rushing toward the sun. "Honored Copernicus, rest your busy feet here a while," the old man said, after the giant moon had set. "Then after you've appreciated some Mozart, perhaps I can have some lunch. If I'm not mistaken." Wang looked at the face full of wrinkles. The wrinkles were long and their curves gentle, as though they were trying to create a kind of harmony. "You're not. I'm Einstein, a pitiful man full of faith in God, though abandoned by him." "What is that giant moon? I've never seen it the previous times I was here. It's already cooled off." "What?" "The big moon. When I was little it was still hot. When it rose to the middle of the sky, I could see the red glow from the central plains. But now it's cold. Haven't you heard about the Great Rip?" "No. What's that?" Einstein sighed and shook his head. "Let's not speak of it. Forget the past. My past, civilization's past, the universe's past, all of it too painful to recall. How did you get to be like this?" Wang searched in his pocket and found some change. He bent over and dropped the money into the hat. "Thank you, Mr. Copernicus. Let's hope that God doesn't abandon you, though I don't have much faith in that. I feel that the model you and Newton and the others created in the East with the help of the human formation computer was very close to being correct. But the little bit of error left was like an uncrossable chasm for Newton and the others. I've always believed that without me, others would have discovered special relativity eventually. But general relativity is different. The bit that Newton lacked was the effect on planetary orbit from the gravitationally induced curvature of spacetime described by general relativity. Though the error caused by it was small, its impact on the results of the computation was fatal. Adding the correction factor for perturbation from spacetime curvature to the classical equations would yield the right mathematical model. The amount of computational power required far exceeds what you accomplished in the East, but is easily provided by modern computers. Have the results of the computation been confirmed by astronomical observations? If that had occurred, do you think I'd be here? But from the perspective of aesthetics, I must be right and the universe must be wrong. God abandoned me, then others abandoned me as well. I'm wanted nowhere. Princeton dismissed me as a professor. UNESCO wouldn't even have me as a science consultant. Before, even if they had begged on their knees, I wouldn't have wanted the position. I even thought of going to Israel to be president, but they changed their minds and said I was nothing but a fraud. Einstein began playing again, picking up right where he had stopped. After listening to him for a while, Wang strode toward the UN building. There's no one in there, Einstein said, still playing. All the members of the General Assembly session are behind the building attending the pendulum initiation ceremony. Wang walked around the building and was greeted by a breathtaking sight, a colossal pendulum that seemed to stretch between the sky and the earth. In fact, Wang had seen it peeking out from behind the building, but he didn't know what he was seeing. The pendulum resembled those constructed by Fu Shi to hypnotize the sun god during the Warring States period, back when Wang Miao first logged on to 3-body. But the pendulum before him had been completely modernized. The two pillars holding up the pendulum were made of metal, each as tall as the Eiffel Tower. The weight was also made of metal, streamlined, with a smooth, mirror-like, electroplated surface. The pendulum line, made of some ultra-strong material, was 196. Chapter 19. 3-body V. So thin as to be almost invisible, and the weight seemed to float in the air between the two towers. Below the pendulum was a crowd of people dressed in suits, probably the leaders of the various countries attending the General Assembly session. They gathered in small cliques and talked amongst themselves quietly, as though waiting for something. "Ah, Copernicus, the man who crossed 5 eras," someone shouted. The others welcomed him. "You're one of those who saw the pendulums of the Warring States period with your own eyes." A friendly man shook and held Wang's hand. Someone introduced the man as the Secretary General of the UN, from Africa. "Yes, I did see them," Wang said. "But why are we building another one now?" "It's a monument for Trisolaris, as well as a tombstone." The Secretary General looked up at the pendulum. From down here, it appeared as big as a submarine. A tombstone? For who? For an aspiration, a striving that lasted through almost 200 civilizations, the effort to solve the 3-body problem, to find the pattern in the sun's movements. Is the effort over? Yes. As of now, it's completely over. Wang hesitated for a moment before taking out a stack of papers, Wei Cheng's 3-body mathematical model. I came here for this. I brought a mathematical model that solves the 3-body problem. I have reason to believe it will likely work. As soon as Wang said this, the crowd around him lost interest. They returned to their cliques to continue their conversations. He noticed that a few even shook their heads and laughed as they left him. The Secretary General took the document and, without even glancing at it, handed it to a slender man wearing glasses standing next to him. "Out of respect for your famed reputation, I'll have my science advisor take a look." "Indeed, everyone here has shown you respect. If anyone else had said what you said, they'd be laughing at him." The science advisor flipped through the document. "Evolutionary algorithm? Copernicus, you're a genius. Anyone who can come up with such an algorithm is a genius. This requires not only superior math skills, but also imagination. You seem to be suggesting that someone has already created such a mathematical model?" "Yes. There are dozens of other mathematical models. Of those, more than half are more advanced than yours. They've all been implemented and run on computers. During the past 2 centuries, such massive computation became the principal activity of this world. Everyone waited for the results as if waiting for Judgment Day. And we have definitively proven that the 3-body problem has no solution." Wang gazed up at the massive pendulum overhead. In the dawn light, it was crystal bright. Its deformed mirror-like surface reflected everything around it like the eye of the world. In this place, in a distant age separated from the here and now by many civilizations, he and King Wen had passed through a forest of giant pendulums on their way to the palace of King Zhou. Just like that, history had made a long circuit and returned to its starting place. The science advisor said, "It's just like we guessed long ago, the 3-body system is a chaotic system. Tiny perturbations can be endlessly amplified. Its patterns of movement essentially cannot be mathematically predicted." Wang felt his scientific knowledge and system of thought become a blur in a single moment. In their place was unprecedented confusion. If even an extremely simple arrangement like the 3-body system is unpredictable chaos, how can we have any faith in discovering the laws of the complicated universe? God is a shameless old gambler. He has abandoned us. The speaker was Einstein, waving his violin. Wang didn't know when he had shown up. The Secretary General slowly nodded. "Yes, God is a gambler. The only hope for Trisolaran civilization is to gamble as well." By now, the giant moon was rising again from the dark side of the horizon. Its large, silvery image was reflected by the surface of the pendulum weight. The light wriggled strangely, as though the weight and the moon had developed a mysterious sympathy together. "This civilization seems to have developed to a very advanced state," Wang said. "Yes. We've mastered the energy of the atom and reached the information age." The Secretary General didn't seem to be too impressed by his own words. Then there is hope. Even if it's impossible to know the pattern of the sun's movements, civilization can continue to develop until it reaches a stage where it can survive the chaotic eras by protecting itself against the devastating catastrophes of those eras. People once thought as you do. That was one of the motivating forces pushing. 198. Chapter 19. Three-body v. Trisolaran civilization to tenaciously come back again and again. But the moon made us realize the naivete of such an idea. The Secretary-General pointed to the rising giant moon. This is probably the first time you've seen this moon. Actually, since it's about a quarter of the size of our planet, it's no longer a moon, but a companion to our world in a double-planet system. It resulted from the Great Rip. The Great Rip? The disaster that destroyed the last civilization. Compared to the civilizations before it, they had ample warning of the disaster. Based on surviving records, the astronomers of Civilization 191 detected a frozen flying star early on. Wang's heart clenched as he heard the last phrase. A frozen flying star was a terrible omen for Trisolaris. When a flying star, or a distant sun, seems to come to a complete stop against the background starfield, then the sun's and the planet's motion vectors are aligned. This has three possible interpretations. The sun and the planet are moving in the same direction at the same speed, the sun and the planet are moving apart from each other, and the sun and the planet are moving toward each other. Before Civilization 191, this last possibility was purely theoretical, a disaster that had never occurred. But the population's fear of it and their vigilance did not diminish, so much so that "frozen flying star" became an extremely unlucky phrase in many Trisolaran civilizations. A single flying star remaining still was sufficient to terrify everyone. And then 3 flying stars froze simultaneously. The people of Civilization 191 stood on the ground, gazing up helplessly at the 3 frozen flying stars, at the 3 suns falling directly toward their world. A few days later, one of the suns moved to a distance where its outer gaseous layer became visible. In the middle of a tranquil night, the star suddenly turned into a blazing sun. Separated by intervals of 30 hours or so, the other 2 suns also appeared in quick succession. This was not a normal kind of trisolar day. By the time the last flying star turned into a sun, the first sun had already swept past the planet at extremely close range. Right after that, the other 2 suns swept past Trisolaris at even closer ranges, well within the planet's Roche limit, such that the tidal forces imposed on Trisolaris by the 3 suns exceeded the force of the planet's gravitational self-attraction. The first sun shook the deepest geological structure of the planet, the second sun tore open a great rift in the planet that went straight to the core, and the third. Roche Limit, Edouard Roche, French astronomer, was the first to calculate the theoretical distance between 2 celestial bodies such that the smaller body will be torn apart by tidal forces from the larger body. The Roche limit is usually expressed as a function of the densities of the bodies and the equatorial radius of the larger body. Sun ripped the planet into 2 pieces. The Secretary-General pointed at the giant moon overhead. That's the smaller piece. There are still ruins from Civilization 191 on it, but it's a lifeless world. It was the most terrible disaster in the entire history of Trisolaris. After the planet was torn apart, the 2 irregularly shaped pieces each returned to spherical form under self-gravitation. The dense, searing planetary core material gushed to the surface, and the oceans boiled over the lava. The continents drifted over the magma like icebergs. As they collided, the ground became as soft as the ocean. Massive mountain ranges tens of thousands of meters high rose in an hour and disappeared just as quickly. For a while, the 2 ripped-apart pieces were still connected by streams of molten lava that coalesced into a space-spanning river. Then the lava cooled and turned into rings around the planets, but because of perturbations from the planets, the rings were unstable. The rocks that formed them fell back to the surface in a rain of giant stones that lasted several centuries. Can you imagine what kind of hell that was? The ecological destruction caused by this catastrophe was the most severe in all of history. All life on the companion planet went extinct, and the mother planet almost became a lifeless waste as well. But in the end, the seeds of life managed to germinate here, and as the geology of the mother planet settled down, evolution began its tottering steps in new oceans and on new continents, until civilization reappeared for the 192nd time. The entire process took 90 million years. Trisolaris's place in the universe is even more grim than we had imagined. What will happen the next time frozen flying stars occur? Very likely, our planet will not just skim past the edge of the sun, but will plunge into the fiery sea of the sun itself. Given enough time, this possibility will become certainty. This was originally just a frightening speculation, but a recent astronomical discovery has caused us to lose all hope for the fate of Trisolaris. The researchers had intended to recover the history of the formation of the stars and the planets based on signs in this stellar system. Instead, they discovered that, in the distant past, the Trisolaran stellar system had 12 planets. Yet, now only this one remains. There is only one explanation: the other 11 planets have all been consumed by the 3 suns. Our world is nothing more than the sole survivor of a great hunt. The fact that civilization has been reincarnated 192 times is only a kind of luck. Also, after further study, we discovered the phenomenon of 200. Chapter 19. 3-body V. Breathing by the 3 stars. The stars breathe. It's only a metaphor. You discovered the gaseous outer layer of the suns, but you didn't know that this gaseous layer expands and contracts over cycles lasting eons, like breathing. When the gaseous layer expands, its thickness can grow by more than a dozen times. This greatly increases the diameter of the sun, like a giant mitt that can catch planets more easily. When a planet passes by a sun at close range, it will enter the sun's gaseous layer. Friction will cause it to lose speed, and finally, like a meteor, it will fall into the blazing sea of the sun, dragging a long, fiery tail. The study results show that in the long history of the Trisolaran stellar system, every time the sun's gaseous layers expanded, 1 or 2 planets were consumed. The other 11 planets all fell into a fiery sea during times when the gaseous layers were at their greatest. Right now, the gaseous layers of the 3 suns are in a contracted stage, otherwise our planet would have already fallen into one of them the last time they skimmed past. But scholars predict that the next expansion will occur in 1,000 years. We can't stay in this terrible place anymore, Einstein said, crouched down on the ground like an old beggar. The Secretary General nodded. We can't stay here any longer. The only path left for Trisolaran civilization is to gamble with the universe. How? Wang asked. We must leave the Trisolaran stellar system and fly into the wide-open sea of stars. We must find in the galaxy a new world to emigrate to. Wang heard a grinding noise. He saw that the giant weight of the pendulum was being pulled up by a thin cable whose other end was attached to an elevated winch. As it rose to its highest point, a great waning crescent moon descended slowly in the sky behind it. The Secretary General solemnly announced, "Start the pendulum." The elevated winch released the cable tied to the pendulum, and the weight noiselessly fell along a smooth arc. Initially, it fell slowly, but then it accelerated, reaching maximum speed at the bottom of the arc. As it sliced through the air, the sound of the wind was deep and resonant. By the time the noise disappeared, the pendulum had followed the arc to its highest point on the other side, and, after pausing for a moment, began its backward swing. Wang felt the great force generated by the movement of the pendulum, as though the ground was shaken by its swings. Unlike a pendulum in the real world, this giant pendulum's period was not stable, but changed constantly. This was due to the continually shifting gravitational attraction of the giant moon. When the giant moon was on this side of the planet, its gravity partially cancelled out the gravity of the planet, causing the pendulum to lose weight. When it was on the other side of the planet, its gravity was added to the gravity of the planet, causing the pendulum's weight to increase, almost to the level it would have had before the Great Rip. As he gazed up at the awe-inspiring swings of the Trisolaran pendulum monument, Wang asked himself, does it represent the yearning for order, or the surrender to chaos? Wang also thought of the pendulum as a gigantic metal fist, swinging eternally against the unfeeling universe. noiselessly shouting out Trisolaran civilization's indomitable battle cry. As Wang Miao's eyes blurred with tears, he saw a line of text appear against the background of the swinging pendulum. 451 years later, Civilization 192 was destroyed by the fiery flames of twin suns appearing together. It had reached the atomic age and the information age. Civilization 192 was a milestone in Trisolaran civilization. It finally proved that the three-body problem had no solution. It gave up the useless effort that had already lasted through 191 cycles and set the course for future civilizations. Thus, the goal of three-body has changed. The new goal is, head for the stars, find a new home. We invite you to log on again. After logging out of three-body, Wang felt exhausted, the same way he did after each previous session. But this time, he only rested half an hour before logging in again. This time, against the pitch-black background, an unexpected line of text appeared. The situation is urgent. The three-body servers are about to be shut down. Please log on freely during the remaining time. Three-body will now go directly to the final scene. 202. Chapter 19. Three-body v. Chapter 20. Three-body, expedition. The chilly dawn revealed a bare landscape. There was no pyramid, no United Nations headquarters, no sign of the pendulum monument. Only a dark desert extended to the horizon, just as Wang had seen the first time he had logged in. But Wang soon realized that he was wrong. What he thought were numerous stones arrayed across the desert were not stones at all, but human heads. The ground was filled with a densely packed crowd. From where he stood on a small hill, Wang could see no end to the sea of people. He estimated the number of individuals within his view alone to be in the hundreds of millions. All the Trisolarans on the planet were probably gathered here. The silence of hundreds of millions created a suffocating sense of strangeness. What are they waiting for? Wang looked around and noticed everyone was gazing up at the sky. Wang lifted his face and found the starry sky had been transformed to an astonishing sight. The stars were arrayed in a square formation. However, Wang soon realized that the stars in the formation were in a synchronous orbit above the planet, moving together against the dimmer, more distant background of the Milky Way. The stars in the formation closest to the direction of dawn were also the brightest, shining with a silver light that cast shadows on the ground. The brightness decreased as one moved away from that edge. Wang counted more than 30 stars along each edge of the formation, which meant a total of more than 1,000 stars. The slow movement of the obviously artificial formation against the starry universe exuded a solemn power. 204. Chapter 20. Three-body 6. A man standing next to him nudged him lightly and spoke in a low voice. "Ah, great Copernicus, why have you come so late? 3 cycles of civilizations have passed, and you've missed many great enterprises." "What is that?" Wang asked, pointing at the formation in the sky. "The Trisolaran interstellar fleet. It's about to begin its expedition." Trisolaran civilization has already achieved the capacity for interstellar flight? Yes. All those magnificent ships can reach 1/10 the speed of light. That is a great accomplishment, as far as I understand it, but it still seems too slow for interstellar flight. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. The key is finding the right target. What's the fleet's destination? A star with planets about 4 light-years away, the closest star to the Trisolaran system. Wang was surprised. The closest star to us is also about 4 light-years away. You? The Earth. Oh, that's not very surprising. In most regions of the Milky Way, the distribution of stars is fairly even. It's the result of star clusters acting under the influence of gravity. The distance between most stars is between 3 and 6 light-years. A loud, joyous cry erupted from the crowd. Wang looked up and saw that every star in the square formation was rapidly growing brighter. This was due to the light emitted by the ships themselves. Their combined illumination soon overwhelmed the dawn, and 1,000 stars became 1,000 little suns. Trisolaris was bathed in glorious daylight, and the crowd raised their hands and formed an endless prairie of uplifted arms. The Trisolaran fleet began to accelerate, solemnly gliding across the dome of the sky, skimming past the giant, just risen moon's tip, casting a dim blue glow against the moon's mountains and plains. The joyous cry subsided. The people of Trisolaris mutely gazed as their hope gradually shrunk in the western sky. They would not know the outcome of the launch in their lifetimes, but 400 or 500 years from now, their descendants would receive the news from a new world, the beginning of a new life for Trisolaran civilization. Wang stood with them, silently gazing, until the phalanx of 1,000 stars shrank into a single star, and until that star disappeared in the western night sky. Then the following text appeared. 205 The Trisolaran expedition to the New World has begun. The fleet is still in flight. 3 Body is over. When you have returned to the real world, if you remain true to the promise you've made, please attend the meetup of the Earth Trisolaris organization. The address will be in the follow-up email you receive. 206. Chapter 20. 3 Body 6. Part 3. Sunset for Humanity. This page intentionally left blank. Chapter 21. Rebels of Earth. There were many more attendees this time than at the last 3 Body meetup. They met at the employee cafeteria of a chemical plant. The factory had already been moved elsewhere, and the interior of the building, which was about to be demolished, was worn out but spacious. About 300 people were gathered here, and Wang Miao noticed many familiar faces, celebrities and elites of various fields, famous scientists, writers, politicians, and so on. The first thing to attract Wang's attention was the strange device at the center of the cafeteria. 3 silver spheres, each slightly smaller than a bowling ball, hovered and swirled over a metal base. Wang guessed the device was probably based on magnetic levitation. The orbits of the 3 spheres were completely random, a real-life version of the 3-body problem. The others didn't pay much mind to the artistic portrayal of the 3-body problem. Instead, they focused on Pan Han, who was standing on top of a broken table in the middle of the cafeteria. "Did you murder Comrade Shin Yufei?" a man asked. "Yes," Pan said, perfectly calm. "It's because the Adventists have traitors like her in our midst that the organization faces the crisis it does today." "Who gave you the right to kill?" "I did it out of a sense of duty to the organization." "Duty? I think you've always had malice in your heart." "What do you mean by that?" "What has the Environment Branch done under your leadership? Your charge is to exploit and create environmental problems to make the population loathe science and modern industry. But in reality, you've only used our Lord's technology and... 210. Chapter 21. Rebels of Earth. Predictions to gain riches and fame for yourself. Do you think I became famous for myself? To my eyes, the entire human race is a pile of garbage. Why would I care what they think? But if I'm not famous, how do I direct and channel their thinking? You always pick the easy tasks. What you've done could have been better accomplished by regular environmentalists. They're more sincere and passionate than you, and with just a little guidance, we could easily take advantage of their actions. Your Environment Branch should be creating environmental disasters and then exploiting them. For example, disseminating poison in reservoirs, leaking toxic waste from chemical plants. Have you done any of those? No, not a single one. We had devised numerous programs and plans, but the commander vetoed them all. Anyway, such acts would have been stupid, at least until recently. The Biology and Medicine Branch once created a catastrophe from the overuse of antibiotics, but that was soon detected. And the rash actions of the European detachment almost drew attention to us. Talk about drawing attention to us, you just murdered someone. Listen to me, comrades. Sooner or later, it would have been unavoidable. You must already know that the governments of the world are preparing for war. In Europe and North America, they're already cracking down on the organization. Once the crackdown begins here, the redemptionists will no doubt side with the government. So our first priority is to purge the redemptionists from the organization. That is not within your authority. Of course the commander must decide. But, comrades, I can tell you right now that the commander is an Adventist. Now you're just making things up. Everyone knows the scope of the commander's power. If the commander really is an Adventist, then the redemptionists would have been purged long ago. Maybe the commander knows something we don't. Perhaps that's what the meeting today is about. After this, the crowd's attention turned away from Pan Han to the crisis before them. A famous scientist who had won the Turing Award jumped onto the table and began to speak. The time for talk is over. Comrades, what should be our next step? Start a global rebellion. Then we're asking to be killed. Long live the spirit of Trisolaris. We shall persevere like the stubborn grass that resprouts after every wildfire. A rebellion will finally reveal our existence to the world. As long as we have an appropriate plan of action, I'm sure many people will support us. This last remark came from Pan Han, and many applauded. Someone yelled, "The commander is here." The crowd parted to form a path. Wang looked up and felt dizzy. The world turned white and black in his eyes, and the only spot of color was the person who had just appeared. Surrounded by a group of young bodyguards, the commander-in-chief of the Earth Trisolaris rebels, Yi Wenjie, walked steadily into the crowd. Yi stood in the middle of the space the crowd cleared for her, raised a bony fist, and, with a resolve and strength that Wang could not believe she possessed, said, "Eliminate human tyranny." The crowd responded in a way that had clearly been rehearsed countless times. The world belongs to Trisolaris. "Hello, comrades," Yi said. Her voice returned to the gentleness that Wang knew. It was only now that he could be sure that it was really her. "I haven't been well lately, and haven't spent much time with all of you. But now the situation is urgent, and I know everyone is under a great deal of pressure, so I've come to see you." "Commander, take care of yourself," someone in the crowd said. Wang could hear the heartfelt concern. Yi said, "Before we move on to more important matters, let's take care of one small detail." Pan Han, she kept her eyes on the crowd even as she called his name. "Here, Commander." Pan emerged from the crowd. Earlier, he had tried to lose himself in the throng. He appeared calm, but the terror in his heart was obvious. The commander had not called him comrade, a bad sign. "You committed a severe violation of the organization's rules." Yi spoke without looking at Pan. Her voice remained kind, as though talking to a child who had been naughty. "Commander, the organization is facing a crisis of survival. If we don't take decisive measures and cleanse the traitors and enemies within, we will lose everything." Yi looked up at Pan, her eyes affectionate. But his breath stopped for a few seconds. The ultimate goal and ideal of the ETO is to lose everything. Everything. 212. Chapter 21. Rebels of Earth. That now belongs to the human race, including us. Then you must be an Adventist. Commander, please openly declare this to be true, because it's very important. Am I right, comrades? Very important, he shouted, and waved an arm as he looked around. But the crowd remained mute. This request is not yours to make. You have seriously violated our code of conduct. If you want to make an appeal, now is the time. Otherwise, you must bear the responsibility. Yi spoke slowly, enunciating every word, as though afraid the child she was teaching had trouble understanding. I went intending to eliminate Wei Cheng, that math prodigy. The decision was made by Comrade Evans and ratified by the committee unanimously. If he really succeeds in creating a mathematical model of the three-body problem that gives a complete solution, our Lord will not come, and the great enterprise of Trisolaris on Earth will be ruined. I only shot at Shin Yufei since she shot at me first. I was acting in self-defense. Yi nodded. Let us believe you. This is, after all, not the most important issue. I hope we can continue to trust you. Now, Please repeat the request you made to me just now. Pan was stunned for a second. That she had moved on didn't seem to relax him. I ask that you openly declare yourself to be an Adventist. After all, the action plan of the Adventists is also your ideal. Then repeat the plan of action. Human society can no longer rely on its own power to solve its problems. It can also no longer rely on its own power to restrain